Welcome to Putting It Together. My name is Kyle Marshall, Canadian Podcast Award winner and self-described Sondheim expert. So previews have started for the company revival on Broadway. I have little birds all over the place who have been sending me information. Now, without seeing it myself, I'm not going to comment too much on it, but it seems like most people have been coming away really impressed, although one person straight up disliked Katrina Lenk as Bobby. But if you are able to see this new production, please let me know your thoughts. I'd appreciate it a whole lot. Something else I appreciate are my Patreon supporters, in particular, new supporter Stephen Miller this week, who I assume is not the Stephen Miller that's the senior policy advisor for the president, but if it is, you can have your $5 back. If you are a person who'd like to support the show financially, you can do that by going to patreon.com/puttingittogetherpodcast. I have some cool stuff planned this year. There's some extra audio that'll be there already or later on today, depending on how busy I get. And I also have some other cool stuff that I'm planning for the rest of the year. If it is ever an economic hardship for you to donate, please save your money. But I certainly appreciate those who can, and it is my goal to become completely fan-supported. This week's episode is already long, but at some point, we need to talk about this Sondheim disco album that just got released yesterday. It is a thing, and I really want to talk about it, but I think I'll save that until next week. So, in that case, let's get to plodding along. Plodding along is the part of the show where I describe to you what's happening in the plot. It's the beginning of Act 2. We're back at the birthday party. Robert/Bobby goes to blow out the candles. However, this time, he or she can only blow out about half of them. This begins the song Side by Side by Side, where Bobby is upset by being the third wheel. Some productions consider What Would We Do Without You a separate song, but in that, Bobby's friends describe why they like having Bobby around. There's this dance break where the couples dance together, but that leaves Bobby alone once more. I think you're going to love Ashley Pribyl. She has so much insight, and spoiler to the conversation, I can't wait to read her book about company. But let's thank some sponsors, and then when we return, we'll talk about the song Side by Side by Side with guest Dr. Ashley Pribyl. Putting It Together is a proud member of the Alberta Podcast Network, powered by ATB. The Alberta Podcast Network promotes and supports Alberta-made podcasts and connects their audiences with Alberta-based businesses and organizations. This week, Putting It Together is sponsored by ATB. For Edmonton band Altamira, making music together full-time was their goal. Thankfully, they discovered ATB's branch for arts and culture, designed by artists, for artists. The branch for arts and culture caters to the unique needs of people who work in creative industries. With ATB's help, Altamira has been making beautiful music together. To see their full story, visit atb.com/Altamira and visit atb.com/thebranch to find out how ATB's branch for arts and culture can support your career in the arts. The Alberta Podcast Network, powered by ATB, is happy to be partnering with Seat Giant to offer you deals on tickets to major sporting events, big concerts, popular theater throughout North America, and more. That's right, we are once again sponsored by Seat Giant. Whether you're at home or on vacation, check Seat Giant for tickets to the hottest events. Maybe there is an NHL playoff game somewhere around you. In a few months, perhaps the touring show of Company is playing next to you. Who can tell? You can visit seatgiant.ca to find tickets. Use the promo code APN at checkout to get 5% off of your purchase. You'll save a bit, and the network gets a little cut of that purchase too. All tickets are in Canadian dollars, even for events that are in the US. Seat Giant is Canadian owned and operated, and it guarantees every ticket. So, help yourself to a great experience while helping the Alberta Podcast Network and a Canadian-owned business. Visit seatgiant.ca and use the offer code APN.
I mean, when you've got friends like mine. Isn't it warm? Isn't it rosy? Side by side.
He's such a cutie.
By side.
Isn't he a cutie?
Ports in a storm.
Ashley Pribyl, thank you so much for joining me here today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be on.
You know, just from our brief conversation before we started hitting record here, I'm really excited to jump into this because I think you're going to bring a bunch of knowledge with you, and I'm looking forward to having my I don't know, my mind rocked a few different times throughout this podcast. We'll see how it goes. But I think maybe the best thing to do at the very beginning here is for you to introduce yourself and tell a little bit about what it is that you do.
I am currently a professor of musicology at Arizona State University. I actually wrote my dissertation on the collaborative relationship between Harold Prince and Stephen Sondheim. So these works are something that I've really dedicated my life to in a way, and I really love them. I'm actually working on a book eventually forthcoming on company itself. So this show is something I've been spending a lot of time thinking about and looking at closely. So I'm really excited to get to talk about what is actually one of my favorite numbers in the show.
Okay, great. So you don't know a whole lot about Sondheim, is what you're trying to say.
Oh, nothing. I do have to admit though, I am a little afraid of fans sometimes
Oh,
because
yeah.
I don't always know all the, little trivia. And so it's like, so we'll see how this goes.
No, I think it's gonna be good. I actually have, just to start off there a little bit, the collaboration between Stephen Sondheim and Hal Prince is, mythical, I guess, at this point. If I'm not mistaken, I think Hal Prince helped get West Side Story up and running, but this is like their first like true blue, like Hal Prince is directing, Stephen Sondheim is writing the score. Like they were very much in the creative aspect of this.
Yes.
What can you say about their collaboration? Because it lasted, what, 5 or 6 shows in a row? What
Yeah.
what do you think they were able to accomplish that other, creative teams didn't?
Well, one of the things, and this is what I focus on in my work, is that Hal Prince was always interested in creating shows that were sort of about the bigger picture, whether it's a political picture or looking at sort of the role of society. And Sondheim was always really much more interested in characters and character-driven shows. So I think they brought these sort of two different viewpoints to the works that they did, and that's how you ended up with these really interesting experimental works that don't feel like they're cold, at least not to me. I know that's a complaint people have about Sondheim a lot. But they're not that sort of Brechtian, alienating, only about social issues works, but they have these really alive characters as well that allow you to be drawn into the show. So, I mean, that's what I think is the best and description of it. And I also think too, we talk about these as Sondheim shows, but this really was Sondheim's first, successful show as a composer
Hmm.
that he was known for. And it really was a Hal Prince and Stephen Sondheim show and a George Firth show too. He's an extremely collaborative worker. And one of the best things about the archives for this show is George Firth was a total pack rat. And so
Oh, good.
there are literally transcripts of meetings that they had talking about this show. So there's just a lot of rich stuff to delve into and look at.
That's good. I mean, Sondheim himself has often said that it's really the collaborators he's had that has made him as popular as he was. Like without the book writer, without the director, without all the other people involved, like yes, he can write some songs if you want him to, but it needs all of that to like build a great Broadway show. So you can't just, I don't think it's necessarily fair just to single out one person, but that's what this podcast is about. So we'll continue doing that for the
That sounds
foreseeable
good to
future.
me. Yeah,
Um,
sounds good to me.
so as a professor,
I still laugh when I say it. It feels strange, but
I'm just thinking, like, as a professor of music and stuff like that, when was your first introduction to Stephen Sondheim's music?
I went to Interlochen Music Camp in Michigan. I don't know if you know of this camp. It's
No.
a fine arts camp. They have a boarding school year round as well. And I'm a French horn player, so
Hmm.
I went to get better at the French horn. But I discovered that I love theater people. That's what I learned that summer. And the boy I had a crush on knew that I loved really dark shows. I was really into opera then, so I
Hmm.
was really talking about like Zalabay and Botzek and these sorts of things. And
Sure.
so he was like, "Have you heard of Sweeney Todd?" And I don't know this show. And he's like, "Oh my God, you'll love it." So he gave me the album. I fell in love with it. It's still my favorite show. I have a Sweeney Todd tattoo.
Nice.
Like, it is a show that is very near and dear to my heart, and was a good gateway drug. I'd already loved musicals, but Sweeney Todd in particular has a lot of operatic qualities about it. So it was really easy for me to sort of transition into being interested in that show.
I cannot wait to get to Sweeney Todd because there's going to be so much stuff to talk about there too. But it's I just actually recently watched this video on YouTube, and this guy breaking it down about how Sondheim very subtly brings in like leitmotifs and phrases and stuff that actually foreshadow where each character is going to go, like the first time you meet them. And then plays around with that and like upend songs and stuff. Anyways, it's fascinating when you get into that kind of like nerdery about how people can write music and subtly make you feel one way when you don't even realize that that's what's going on. What's the tattoo?
The original logo from the 1979 poster. It's actually based on a 19th century woodcutting, so I love it.
I was hoping it was just Angela Lansbury's face, just right on the shoulder or something like that.
No, but it is her, technically.
Yeah, I do love that drawing. It is honestly the Sweeney Todd album cover. That along with Follies are like my two favorite Sondheim pieces of art. I think they're really, really great.
I know. I wanted to get a company tattoo, but there's really nothing like iconic imagery in company that translates well into a tattoo, you know? So.
No, the closest you get now is in the newest version. They have those balloons as like recurring motifs and stuff like that. But then
I'm not doing that as a tattoo. No way.
No. What brought you to company then? If Sweeney Todd was your gateway drug, how did you eventually find your way to company?
So that was in 2004, very soon after the Raúl Esparza version of Company came out. And I listened to it. I was, I guess, 17 at the time, and I didn't love it. I think I was too young for the show, honestly. And then I saw it again in theaters with Neil Patrick Harris a few years later. And then I fell in love with it. I was in my early 20s then, and it was, I don't know, I'm 32 now and still single. So there's a lot of ways in which I really relate to this show and really sort of fell in love with it that way. And in particular, the ending, because of its ambiguity. I really love a nice ambiguous ending.
Yeah, I mean, this is what I've been kind of saying over and over here on this Company season, which is that it was a show that when I first listened to it as a teenager, there was a couple of songs that I enjoyed, but overall I was like, maybe this one just isn't for me. And then it's something that as I got older, like you start to uncover different things about this show, and I think it really grows with you a lot, especially if you've had those relationships and you've been in those same situations. It's like, yeah, I've been there. I know exactly what this feels like. Or as a person who is single when most of your friends are married, it's like, I 100% understand how Bobby is feeling in this situation right now. So
there's this line in the show that I just relate to so much, which is, when you're married, they're just there all the time. That's where I'm at right now.
Right. Yeah, for sure. Well, we're talking about an interesting song here. I mean, talk about what do you call this? Because alternatively, it's called Side by Side by Side. That's actually what it's called in Sondheim's book, Finishing the Hat. Yeah. However, in most of the recordings, it's Side by Side by Side / What Would We Do Without You? And then just to be different, the 2006 revival decides to split those into two different songs.
Ugh.
However,
which is so annoying because sometimes you have it on shuffle and then it just goes to a different song, and I'm like, that song wasn't finished.
Yeah, it's not done yet. So we are going to talk about it if it was one complete work here today. And I know that you said this is how Act 2 opens up for us. Let's talk a little bit though how this song gets set up in the first place, because I think it is an interesting entry point into it, because we're back at that birthday party that kind of keeps getting referenced within this show, and we also have that recurring Bobby baby, Bobby Bobby, that recurring motif that keeps getting played throughout the show. But Bobby really does stop the action when he says, "When you've got friends like mine," before he or she jumps into this song. I think that I've seen it be performed in different ways. What's your reading on this line itself? How are we as an audience supposed to take that line before we even get into the song itself?
Bobby actually says it twice. So he interrupts by saying, "When you've got friends like mine," and then depending on the actor, looks around and, "When you've got friends like mine," and that's the setup. I think it's an ambiguous line on purpose, and you can read it a lot of ways. Like, there are performers who are very positive about it. Like, when you have friends like mine, you don't need other people. But then there's also like Raúl Esparza's version, which I will admit is my favorite Bobby, because he does have that New York sarcasm that I love so much.
Sure.
And his is a very sarcastic saying of that line. I think depending on how that line is said tinges how you read the entire song.
I agree, because there is that, I don't know, ironic way that Raúl Esparza kind of says it.
I mean, when you've got friends like mine. When you've got friends like mine.
And then the Rosalie Craig version, I find that she almost is like hamming it up or something like that. Like, when you've got friends like mine. Like, I don't know. It's a very different entry point into this song.
I mean, when you've got friends like mine. When you've got friends like mine.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, because you can read this song as being, and I know we're going to talk about this more at the end, but as either, a celebration of friendship, or how friendship covers up a lot of problems, or is shallow in some way. And so it can be read either way. And I like that entry line. I think it's very George Firth in terms of it has that sort of 1960s American playwright feel to it.
Yeah, for sure.
This is definitely a show that is both modern and of its time.
That's actually just an interesting side question here before we jump into the lyrics next, which is, this is written, well, it debuts in 1970, probably was being written in the late 1960s. As it's been adapted and revived here over the years, I think that there are still elements that feel we're still in the 1970s, but at the same time, it does feel very modern in what it's trying to communicate. I don't know, do you have any insight into why you think that is? Why it's still something people want to come back to again and again when it does still have that 1970s feel?
Well, read my book, but seriously,
yeah.
I mean, that's basically what it's about.
Sure.
Part of it is that the period from 1970s to the present has been a very unstable period for the whole idea of marriage and what marriage means. And so I think these questions that Bobby is asking continue to be relevant, because once marriage is divorced from the social contract aspect of it, once you have no fault divorce, once you have women being able to be independent of men, get their own credit cards, which didn't happen until the late 70s, in case you wanted to know, that kind of stuff, then marriage becomes something very different. And we still haven't really figured out what that is yet. And so I think these questions that are being asked, even though there are moments that are very 70s, the overall question is of what is marriage mean in the modern world is one that we haven't answered.
Well, here we're going to have a definitive answer by the end of this podcast, which is good news for everyone. So this is how the song starts, and I'm going to make an admission here right at the very beginning. Normally, I tell people, "Hey, I am using the book Finishing the Hat, written by Stephen Sondheim, for all the lyrics." But for whatever reason, and I don't really know why he decided to do this, this song, I feel, is very well known because there's these interjections by his friends as Robert is singing throughout this. But those interjections are not included in the book. So I'm actually using genius.com, the website that usually will explain lyrics to you, to kind of go through here so I can say like what the people are interjecting. So Robert starts, "Isn't it warm? Isn't it rosy? Side by side." And then Sarah breaks in, "He's such a cutie." And Robert finishes, "By side. Isn't he a cutie? Ports in a storm, comfy and cozy, side by side." And then Peter breaks in, "He never loses his cool. By side. I envy that. Everything shines, how sweet." And then a bunch of people get together side by side, and Susan says, "We're just so fond of him." And Robert finishes, "By side, parallel lines, who meet." And the couples come together, "Love him, can't get enough of him."
Isn't it warm? Isn't it rosy?
side by
He's
side.
such a cutie.
By
Isn't
side.
he a cutie?
Ports in a storm, comfy and cozy, side by side.
It never loses its cool.
By side.
I envy that.
Everything shines. How sweet. Side by
We're just so
side.
fond of him.
By side. Parallel lines who meet.
Love him. Can't get enough of him.
Everyone.
Now, I will say that I find that last line, love him, can't get enough of him, is always sung kind of sarcastically a little bit. But I don't know, what immediately jumps out at you from this opening bit?
One of the things that I really like is how the interjections, and that's why I wish they were in here too, side by side, interjection by side, because we're so used to that phrase side by side. And then adding that last by side with the interjection, I feel, at least the first time, adds sort of this element of surprise or unexpectedness. That is, kind of the point of this, right? Is that we're used to couples and always having two people together, and this idea of a third person,
Right.
it like highlights that a lot.
The recurring theme that happens throughout this show, which is that Bobby does feel this connection to his friends, but he is never feeling a part of them completely, right? Like the couple is the couple. They are forming this life together. They are, have made those vows with one another. And he is kind of always this outside person coming into that. Like friends can rely on them and everything like that, but at the same time, still a separate piece. And that's sometimes a hard thing to combat, which is like, I feel very connected with you, but I'm never going to be able to go to like that next level. We're just going to be those friends. Not that I think there's a bad thing about just having friendships in your life, but when you're constantly the person that's on the outside, that can sometimes drain at you a bit.
Well, I think too, because I will say personally, I have a very strong bias about, I hate that term just friends, right? Because I think friendship is really important. And that's actually one of the things, my own reading of the show is very different than other people's because of that. There is a way in which the couples are deliberately excluding him and using him for their own means. And that's what we see in these interjections too. All these words are not, like they're pleasant words, but they're not passionate words, right? So rosy, warm, cozy, these are all sort of the things we associate with, I don't know, grandmas and those sorts of platonic, comfortable relationships, but not the passion that you would get in necessarily a romantic relationship or even an extremely intimate friendship.
I like that idea because I often find myself doing the same thing, which is like kind of reducing friendship in my language when I don't necessarily mean it to be that way. But I think we as a culture have been fed this diet for decades, if not centuries, where like love is like the most important relationship that you can have, and kind of devaluing some of the other relationships that we can have in our life as well. And in a way, I think whether the creators meant to or not, I think that company does explore that quite a bit, which is this the most important thing, or is it just one of many important relationships that you're going to have in your life? Does marriage have to be the most important thing going on? So, I don't know. There's just one of those other aspects that you can, I guess, layer onto this. I guess my next question is this. The parallel lines who meet. Which by the way, I'm just going to point this out. Genius.com is very kind and saying, in basic geometry, parallel lines never meet. So thank you, Genius.com, for letting me know that. How do you read this? I mean, for me, I guess it's like something that is not meant to happen actually finally does happen. Or is this, maybe I'm just really overthinking this, is this just two parallel lines actually meeting by coming from opposite directions and colliding into one another? I don't know. How do you take a look at that?
I don't think you can overthink a Sondheim lyric. I'll say that just to start. But I guess I think of it as this idea of two independent lives just running side by side, right next
Yep.
to each other, parallel to each other. And yet meeting in that they're interacting, but they're never actually becoming one in the same way that a marriage would, right? So maybe it's part of Bobby's fear of actually really interconnecting with people.
Right.
And so he just thinks of his life as, I'm going in this direction, and maybe if this is the x-axis that they're on, not to get too geometrical into this, then the y-axis is time. So they're running parallel at the same time and maybe in the same place, but they're not related, right?
Yeah.
And so I think maybe in a way it is that shallowness of this relationship that he has with these people.
Yeah, that's what his eternal search is for. He does want that that next step, and he wants that. I mean, what being alive is all about. He wants someone to hold him too close and stuff like that. That's what he eventually realized in his life. Not that he doesn't want to have his friends around, but it's like they are kind of using me in a in a way to get what they need, and I don't know if he's getting everything that he needs out of these relationships anymore. Well, continuing on, Robert/Bobby continues singing, "Everyone winks, nobody's nosy, side by side." Joanne says, "He is just crazy about me," by side. And then Paul says, "He's a very tender guy. You make the drinks and I'll bring the posy." And Robert and Joanne go side by side. Larry says, "He's always there when you need him," by side. "One is lonely and two is boring. Think what you can keep ignoring," side by side. Amy says, "He's my best friend. I mean, next to my husband," by side. And then all the couples, "Never a bother, 7 times a godfather."
Everyone winks, nobody's nosy, side by side.
She feels exactly the way I do.
By side.
About everything.
You make the drinks and I'll bring the posy, side by side.
She's always there when you need her.
By side.
That's class.
One is lonely and two is boring. Think what you can keep ignoring, side.
She's my best friend.
By side.
Second best.
By side.
Babysitter, plus a perfect babysitter, year after year.
Okay, so there's some things to, I think, break down here for sure. One of the things that has always stood out to me here a little bit is like, "You make the drinks and I'll bring the posy." I mean, yes, it's so that he can rhyme it with nosy, and earlier with Rosie up above there. But it is just I think just like a little wink line there from Sondheim himself, just so that he can think of a flower that this person can actually bring along with him. Unless you have any other like deeper meaning of bringing a posy.
No,
Yeah.
I don't.
But I actually want to get into this a little bit because there was a previous guest who mentioned, and I'm going to blank on who it was, but how Sondheim loves using numbers. Like, he will bring numbers into his songs a whole lot. And so this is no exception, where 1 is lonely, 2 is boring. Think what you can keep ignoring. Why do you think 2 is boring?
I love this line. It's one of my favorites in this song. I think there's this idea of one of Bobby's fears is clearly the rut, the relationship rut, that you end up with this person and you don't get to have the excitement that you get to have as a single person, right? He's always going to parties, always going out, always meeting new people, and that's going to stop once you're in a relationship. Like, somehow monogamy or marriage means that you don't get to do new things anymore. And so I think there's that part. I also think that the next line, think what you can keep ignoring, is also very telling, because it's this idea that you don't want to have those hard, intimate conversations with your partner, which is a very unhealthy way to approach marriage.
Sure. Yes.
But I think it is Bobby's way of approaching marriage. And so that for him, 2 is boring because you don't want to get into the nitty gritty. That's too intimate. That's too close. And with a third person, you can enjoy having people around without having to do that part.
It's interesting because you can see that too replicated in a few other places within the show, where when Bobby is like interacting with his girlfriends, the 3 girlfriends that are in the piece, it is very like surface level stuff. Like we're not getting into like really hard conversations necessarily with them. And I think that's part of the reason why all of his friends constantly talk about these character traits that he has, where it's like he's analyzing, he's always watching people, and he's always, but he's always nice and he's always there for us. But I don't know if they can't seem to ever penetrate him either. So Bobby seems like he is closed off in a way. He's warm and friendly and is giving, but at the same time, when it comes to feelings and what he actually wants, he doesn't like to get into that area.
You know, there's a way in which that's comforting to the couples as well, right? Like they don't have to worry about that.
Yeah, it's not going to be drama or anything like that for him to come over.
Right. I do want to talk about Amy's line here.
Okay, for sure.
She's my best friend. And then I can't remember what you said, but in some of the versions, they also go, second best, right? She looks at Paul and goes, I think second best.
Yeah, I mean, it's actually changed a couple times throughout the different recordings. Sometimes she'll say second best. And then sometimes, I think it's in the original, she says, next to my husband is what she says.
But I find this interesting because I don't know if you've talked about this already, if you're going to talk about it, but the original ending of this show was to have Bobby propose to Amy.
Right.
And so I find this really interesting if we often think about the way that we frame our spouse as our best friend. And this, in a way, questions that. Like, does that have to be the case? Is it insulting to your partner to have a best friend that's not your husband? And then this also brings up for me the question of beard marriages, which is a question that always comes up with Bobby. Is Bobby gay? And I think in the new version, this is even more apparent because Amy is Jamie and Jamie is a gay man. And there is this way in which this kind of, I'm going to marry my best friend, but we're not going to have that traditional relationship because he's a gay man and we're going to have other relationships outside of it, like comes in and I think is, you know, something that's clearly still happening during the 70s. I mean, Michael Bennett marries Donna McKechnie after this.
Right.
So I don't know. It's just something I think about. I don't have any conclusions yet. But
no, I think it's interesting. Like, I mean, you could be super cynical and be like, well, they probably just didn't remove it, even though they changed the ending of the show, which might be true. But I think that what the more interesting reading here is what you bring up is that why can't this just literally be Bobby and Amy are just really good friends, and that's it. Like, I think that we are, as a society, breaking down these traditional relationships where it's like, well, a marriage is a marriage for sure, and that's a very important person in your life, and maybe is the most important person in your life, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they are like the best friend you've ever had. I mean, there's people that have grown up together, right? There's like, we've been friends since we were like 3 or 4 years old. We've married other people, but we're still like very, very close to one another. So I don't think it's absolutely necessary that your spouse has to be your best friend. But I'm sure in the 70s too, when this debuted, that would have been maybe a little bit of the arch of the eyebrow probably went up on some of the theater goers' faces.
Yeah, and too, I think, so I do know for sure that, or at least mostly for sure, that this song was written after the ending was changed.
Mm-hmm.
It was one of the last songs written for the show. And I mean, the ending was still not being alive, obviously, but we were past the proposing to Amy part and we were on to Happily Ever After.
Right.
Sorry, I just know that from archives, so there's no way we could have known that. This idea that your spouse is your best friend is actually very new. You know, in the 19th century, you married someone, but most of your social circle was homosocial. So your actual friends, the people you talked about your problems to, were people who were the same gender as you in those single gender spaces. So this is like a very 20th century idea. Just throwing that out there.
No, that's I love it. Here's how they continue on. So they all get together, say year after year, older and older. Larry says, "It's amazing. We've gotten older each year, and he seems to stay exactly the same." Sharing a tear, lending a shoulder. And then David says, "You know what comes to mind every time I see him? The Seagram's building. Isn't that funny?" And then, "Ain't we got fun? No strain." Joanne says, "You know, sometimes I catch him looking and looking. I just look right back. Permanent sun, no rain. We're so crazy, he's so sane."
Year after year, older and older.
It's amazing. We've gotten older each year, and he seems to stay exactly the same.
Sharing a tear, lending a shoulder.
You know what comes to my mind every time I see him?
What?
The Seagram's building. Isn't that funny?
Ain't we got fun? No strain.
You know, sometimes I catch him looking and looking. I just look right back.
Permanent sun, no rain. We're so crazy, he's so sane. Friendship.
Before it goes by, I just have to say, one of my all-time favorite recordings of all time is actually on the original Broadway cast recording of this song, where when David says, "You know what comes to mind every time I see him? The Seagram's building. Isn't that funny?" It's Elaine Stritch goes like, "Ha-ha," like she just does this like real inflection with her voice. I love it. I wish that could be my ringtone, like just that small section of Elaine Stritch laughing. But yeah, so we're going back and forth with a lot of people kind of interjecting what they're saying here. I want to go through each one of these here, which is, okay, so we've gotten older each year, and he seems to stay exactly the same. To me, sounds like an underhanded compliment, if anything, which is like, hey, we're actually doing stuff, and you seem to like just stay exactly where you are. That kind of feels what is being unsaid here.
I feel like it's definitely a complicated line because there is this way in which we measure aging in our culture by like the things you've achieved in your life, right? And there's like a script for that. It includes getting married and having children, and he's not doing those things, right? So he's staying that like pre-marriage age, whatever that is, whatever that means. And everyone else is getting older. But at the same time, I do feel there's like a tinge of jealousy in it as well.
Yes, yeah.
That all the men especially seem to have in this show.
The men are so weird to me because I find that you have like, "Have I Got a Girl for You?" and like in this song too. And like the undercurrent is like, oh, marriage is terrible in so many ways. And yet at the same time, they have that song Sorry Grateful, which they're so super vulnerable in and being like, hey, like marriage is hard, but it's still a good thing overall. So it seems to be this weird duality that they exist in.
Yeah, and I think that exists in our culture too. Like, the old ball and chain. Like there is this way in which for men, like maybe they're just fulfilling that script because they feel like they're supposed to feel that way, whether they actually do or not, in terms of how they feel about marriage. It does seem to be sort of that, I guess, bringing out that tension as well.
Well, let's talk about the Seagram's building, okay? I guess my quick question is, do you know what the Seagram's building is?
375 Park Avenue. Not just another New York office building, but in the words of architectural leaders, a singular landmark with aloof and aristocratic qualities not likely to be often repeated in any city anywhere. A new standard of architectural quality. Out of the dreams of one industrialist, this great new edifice came into being. He had the vision of something special for his company's headquarters, a skyscraper that would become a landmark. The Park Avenue.
Yeah, it's a building in New York.
It is. I'll be very upfront. I've said this now multiple times too, which is that oftentimes I'll hear lyrics in shows and be like, I kind of get the context of what the person is saying, but I don't actually know specifically what they mean. This has always been that way, where it's like, well, this is obviously a laugh line. Elaine Stritch just laughed at it, so I know this is funny, but I don't actually know why it's funny. So this is my best guess. Here's some architecture history for you. The Seagram's building is a skyscraper at 375 Park Avenue between East 52nd and 53rd Streets in Midtown Manhattan. The integral plaza building, stone-faced lobby, and distinctive glass and bronze exterior were designed by German-American architect Ludwig Miles van der Rohe. It's a blocky and unremarkable building and looks just like a standard skyscraper. This is from Wikipedia, by the way, that I'm reading this. So it is. If you look at it, it is like, oh, that is a skyscraper. It is a block building with some windows on it, and it looks very imposing. So my interpretation of this line is that it means that Bobby is just like this thing that exists. It's like, yep, that's a building. Just like, yep, that's a human over there. There's nothing that's like, I don't know, unique or special about them necessarily. They just kind of exist. So again, it's one of those things like, oh, that's kind of a mean thing to say about somebody.
I heard that it's because you can see out of it, but you can't see into it. I don't know if that's true or not. That was just what I heard. But that actually brings up, I stole this quote that I wanted to share because I think that sort of characterization of Bobby as empty is one that is people are very like critical of the show about. So the Channel 13 News, Patrick O'Connor on the Channel 13 News, in response to the original production, had this quote. You don't mind if I read it, do you?
No, go ahead.
Mr. Jones, Dean Jones, is kind of an animated cartoon character, and you insert your face where a real face should be. If the part were played by a better performer, say Jerry Orbach, the impact of the show would have been lessened. I love that line because I think you're right. One of the things that makes Bobby so compelling is there's nothing distinctive about him. So you as the audience member are required, or the actor, the performer, depending upon who's performing, are required to fill in the blanks. So there's a lot of space there. And depending upon the talent of the performer, depending upon the creativity of the audience, that this is a character that can be read in a lot of other ways. And I like this quote of like, you can put your face where Bobby's face is, in this way of like, you can just read sort of into Bobby whatever your own fears and insecurities about marriage and relationships are.
Which is actually why I think that I relate so closely with it nowadays, is because I have put so much of my own baggage into that character. It's like, oh, it's like, it's me. It's me up there that's doing this. So obviously this is what his backstory is, but like, I don't know that. Like there's nothing in the text that actually does say that at all. In fact, what's interesting is that this show kind of does the kind of big no-no, supposedly, of theater, which is they do a lot of telling and not showing. So all the characters talk about Bobby, like this is what he does and this is how he acts and everything. But it's up to the actor then to kind of see that through. We assume that he's charming and nice and everything, but if the actor doesn't play him like that, then we don't really know why these characters are friends in the first place. So it does have that, like, you have to play this pretty... You have to have a great actor in this role so that everything kind of pays off by the end.
Yeah, or you could have as not great of an actor and then just let people fill in the blanks. I mean, Tony Perkins talks about how he's so happy he didn't have to play this role. I think he says he would have shot himself at some point because it's so empty and so difficult. And you're totally right about like you bringing all of your own baggage, because when I saw this with Rosalie Craig, you know, as a woman seeing this show with a woman as Bobby, and then they also altered a lot to be about childbearing and a lot more sort of relevant to women's issues about marriage. I was like sobbing at the end because I was just like, this show is so about me. It's not. It's about every 35-year-old, right? But
yeah, right.
Who's single, and probably even the married ones too. I don't know. I have not been in that situation, but so I think that is one of the powers of this show. It's something that the characters, the reason they're friends with him, they can make him be whatever they want him to be too.
Talking about the 2018 version with Rosalie Craig, they do change a line where they don't say the Seagram's building, they say the Chrysler building.
I made my first visit to this city in 1973. Here I tasted my first espresso and I saw the places where Bob Dylan and Jack Kerouac, Edgar Allan Poe, Joe DiMaggio sat and stood, lived, played. And I saw the Chrysler. 10 years later, I could see it from a small servants' quarters I was renting. In New York, they call that a penthouse. I've never liked New York that much, the violence and the filth. But the Chrysler is another matter.
I do actually think this fundamentally changes how we're supposed to take that line. Because the Chrysler building, this is going to sound like I'm doing this off the top of my head. I don't know this actually, but the Chrysler Building is an Art Deco style skyscraper located in the Turtle Bay neighborhood on the east side of Manhattan at the intersection of 42nd Street and Lexington Avenue. But the structure was the world's tallest building for 11 months before it was surpassed by the Empire State Building. When the Chrysler Building opened, there were mixed reviews of the building's design, ranging from it being inane and unoriginal to that it was this modernist and iconic building. But it's now evolved to now being this paragon of Art Deco architectural style and was ranked in 2007 as the 9th favorite architecture by the American Institute of Architects.
You know what comes to my mind when I see her? The Chrysler Building. Isn't that weird?
So it's you've probably seen it, especially if you've ever seen a movie where they do like the sweep over New York City and stuff. It kind of has like a dome top with a big spire at the top of it. I'll probably put like a picture in the show notes just so people know what both of these buildings actually look like. That being said, I think this changes the lyrics slightly because this is one that does actually stand out from the rest, rather than a building that's supposed to be made to, like, I don't know, look like everything around it and stay the same.
Yeah, and it's interesting. It's an interesting building because if you do get a chance to go to New York, a lot of people mistake it at first for the Empire State Building.
Right.
Because they were constructed so closely together and they're both in that Art Deco style. And honestly, in my opinion, the Chrysler Building is better looking.
Right.
Yes, it's iconic, but it also gets mistaken for something else. I don't know. That's how I interpret
yeah,
it.
okay,
That's
I could see
totally
that.
like me and my experiences being put onto this lyric. So I don't know. I mean, we can ask. That's the thing.
Yeah, no, I like, yeah. Was it Marianne Williamson? No, who's the director?
No, Marianne Elliott.
Marianne Elliott. Yeah.
Tell us, why did you change it?
Yeah, why did you do this? Okay, well, to continue on, we have them all coming together saying, friendship forbids anything bitter. And Paul says, a person like Bob doesn't have the good things, and he doesn't have the bad things, but he doesn't have the good things. Being the kids as well as the sitter. And then Harry says, let me make him a drink. He's the one guy I know I feel should drink more. And then 1's impossible, 2 is dreary, 3 is company, safe and cheery. Side, Sarah says, he always looks like he's keeping score. By side, who's winning, Robert? By here is the church, here is the steeple. Open the doors and see all the crazy married people.
Crazy, he's so sane. Friendship forbids anything bitter.
A person like Bob doesn't have the good things and he doesn't have the bad things. But he doesn't have the good things either.
Being the kids as well as the sitter.
Let me make him a drink. He's the only guy I know I feel should drink more.
1's impossible, 2 is dreary, 3 is company, safe and cheery.
He always looks like he's keeping score. Who's winning, Robert?
Here is the church, here is the steeple. Open the doors and see all the crazy married people.
What would we do without you?
Okay. Where to start with this one? I will just say, again, in passing, I've always liked the line, he's the one guy I know I feel should drink more. I think it's just a funny line. Yeah. But something that we were kind of discussing before we started to record here too is 1's impossible, 2 is jury, 3 is company, safe and cheery. Coming back to the numbers again, Sondheim likes to use numbers, but we're trying to figure out if 3 is company was a phrase before this.
Yeah, I have no idea. I've been trying to look into it. Obviously not that hard, but using Google Ngrams. I don't know if you know what Google Ngrams are, so I'll just explain it.
Yeah, explain it.
So basically, Google Books has, this huge archive of just books that are searchable. And so what Google Ngrams does is it tells you the frequency in which a phrase occurs over time within the archive of Google Books. Now, obviously, Google Books doesn't have every book ever written, so it's not good necessarily for saying like this is the time when this phrase was invented, but you can sort of see the trends and see if it was common or not. And so this one I found was not that common, or wasn't common before, but it wasn't that common after either, so it wasn't that helpful.
No. Well, the thing about it is why I didn't even think about that as being a thing is that I think you know, the 70s sitcom Three's Company is something that I grew up watching.
Come and knock on our door.
Come and knock on our door.
We've been waiting for you.
We've been waiting for you.
Where the kisses are hers and his. Three's Company too. Come and dance.
Not that I was born in the 70s, but it was just on in reruns. So I watched so much of that show. And so I think that's just ingrained in my head as being, yeah, that's a phrase. And then, of course, there's also the long-running phrase like 2 is company, 3's a crowd.
Right.
Which I think Sondheim is playing around with here anyways. I think that's what the wordplay is supposed to be. But was 3 is company something that he completely came up with, or was that also something that people were using too? I don't know. This is like the everything's coming up roses thing where it feels like people were probably saying it, but no, he actually just made it up and now people say it all the time.
Yeah, because it is clearly a play on this idiom about 2's company, 3's a crowd. And it makes me wonder too, let's say he did come up with it, but then the title of the show, 3's Company, was independent. Like, what is it about this time that made people want to change this idiom in this way? These are the questions that I always ask. But
I don't know. It's a good question though. I also want to talk about the phrase here that constantly gets said through this show about how the married people are crazy, or that Bobby drives people crazy. We'll take out for right now the fact that is getting less and less of an okay thing to say anyways, saying crazy. But why do you think we keep coming back to this idea that the married people are the crazy ones?
I mean, let's be real. His friends are all a little neurotic.
Sure. Yeah.
They all need to go to therapy is really, I feel, a huge part of this. Mm-hmm. Everyone in the show should just go to therapy. But
yeah. That's really what the tagline should be. It's like, see company, go to therapy afterwards.
That's right. I do think there is this idea of like folie à deux, like a shared neurosis that happens, that Bobby thinks happens when you get with someone, that like they're little things that you hate that they do, and then you have things that you do that they hate, and then you drive each other crazy, and you get into these habits that don't make sense to anyone except the two of you. It is like that. I don't know. What do you think?
I honestly do believe that there is what they're subtly trying to do is make this point that the ones that are in the committed relationships are unstable, I guess, for a lack of a better word, where Bobby is like this centered one, so that when we get to being alive, it's like, oh, no. He is just has as much inner turmoil as everybody else. He was just not allowing himself to feel like these other people were. For me, I've always taken a look at this show as being something that everyone has their own hang-ups and hold-ups and stuff in relationships and elsewhere, but I don't think either one of them are like actually crazy. Each one of them kind of is looks at each other as like this alien creature trying to figure each other out. Like, it's like, oh, the single people over there, I can't even remember what that's like. Whereas the single people, like, I can't even imagine what it'd be like to have someone just be there all the time. And so I think it's like that acceptance at the end of the show where it's like, no, we can actually learn from each other here a little bit more. And Bobby's kind of now allowing himself to be like, maybe I can actually see myself as one of these quote-unquote crazy people, the people I've been rejecting here subtly throughout the entire show.
Oh, that's such a sweet reading of the show. I like it.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, he's the one who says that they're crazy, but they also say that they're crazy.
That is true, yeah.
So I find that interesting. But is that sort of just like, oh, look at us, we're so crazy, haha, when we don't actually think we're crazy, we just think that other people are wrong. We're right.
It's like the people like, I'm so random, like in life nowadays. It's like, well, you're not really. No, you're no more random than any other person that I've come across. But sure, if that's how we want to define ourselves.
Yeah, exactly.
So here's where the song changes a little bit, like changes the actual melody and tempo. So the couples are like, what would we do without you? How would we ever get through? Who would I complain to for hours? Who'd bring me the flowers when I have the flu? Who'd finish yesterday's stew? Who'd take the kids to the zoo? Who is so dear and who is so deep? And who would keep her occupied when I want to sleep? That's what the men say. The women say, and who would keep him occupied when I want to sleep is what the women say. And then they come back together. How would we ever get through? What would we do without you?
What would we do without you? How would we ever get through? Who would I complain to for hours? Who'd bring me the flowers when I have the flu? Who'd finish yesterday's stew? Who'd take the kids to the zoo? Who is so cool and who is so deep? And who would keep her company when I want to sleep? How would we ever get through? What would we do without you?
So these next few sections I find are going to be just like a lot of listing of different things, for sure. But it's interesting what they're saying they're getting Bobby to do. Like they're complaining to him for hours. They're asking him to bring, or like he's bringing them flowers. He's finishing dinners for them, taking the kids to the zoo. Like they're asking a lot of stuff of this one single guy that they're friends with.
Yeah, I always think if you have, 4 pairs of married friends and you're doing this for all of them, that's a lot.
That's a lot of stuff, yeah.
That's more than just being married to one person. I will say, I love this section because it's just so good. The rhymes are so clever and the words fit perfectly into the rhythm of the music. This is the Sondheim that I love the most because I love a good lyric and I love a good lyric that fits well and the rhymes are actual rhymes. Anyway, that's a side note.
I will say too, like just to provide some context, this is usually the part. I've seen it staged a couple different ways, but usually this is them literally getting into like a song and dance routine. In some cases, like with like canes and top hats and stuff like that, where like they're literally dancing around. They're also doing this thing where they pause and like do the thing like that, like they just breathe really heavily and then like launch into their next little bit and stuff like that, which I actually find the 2006 version does maybe a touch too much, but the song still works for me. From this first one I just read, is there a specific rhyme that you like the most?
I just like the rhyme scheme. So you have you through flu, stew, zoo, but then you have would I complain to you for hours who'd bring me the flowers. I love that one.
Yeah, it kind of breaks that up a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's A, B, B, A. And just to have that many A's is very difficult. And I know it's a short word and you is an easy word to rhyme, but still, I just really like it.
Well, here's how it gets even better, because for me, this might be the best example would be the chorus in the bowl that happens earlier in the show, where some people love it and some people hate it. Because in the next section we have, what would we do without you? How would we ever get through? Should there be a marital squabble? Available bauble, be there with the glue. Who could we open up to? Secrets we keep from guess who? Who is so safe and who is so sound? You never need an analyst with Bobby around. How would we ever get through? What would we do without you?
What would we do without you? How would we ever get through? Should there be a marital squabble, available bauble, be there with the glue. Who could we open up to? Secrets we keep from guess who? Who is so safe and who is so sound? You never need an analyst with Bobby around. How would we ever get through? What would we do without you?
So, marital squabble with available bauble. So Bob well, but like compressed down into that. I mean, it definitely works. I can't say it doesn't work, but yeah, I can see where people might be a little bit miffed at him rhyming it that way.
Well, he does actually change it in this new version. The new line is, should there be some marital tension, it's your intervention, begins as anew.
Should there be some marital tension, it's her intervention that starts us anew.
But I actually like this one. And the reason I do is in part because the song is in a like 20s vaudeville style.
Sure.
And that rhyme is like ridiculous enough that it is sort of a Cole Porter rhyme. And that's what I like about it, is it has that sort of 20s, 30s feel to it, which is very specific to me and not helpful. But
well, no, it just goes back into the pastiche that Sondheim is known for. Like, he loves to, emulate different styles and stuff like that. So this is just him trying it out, trying his Cole Porter hat on.
A Cole Porter rhyme to me, and it's just sort of ridiculous and funny, but it also impossible to understand if you don't know the words. Like, I remember thinking it was Bobble, like Bobble, and just being really confused for a long time, and then I got it. So there's that fun part of it too, of like some of these lyrics that are more difficult when you finally understand, like, oh, that's what's happening. It is kind of fun. It's like a puzzle.
I mean, it is fun to me. Like, and Sondheim is known for even like creating puzzles in his spare time. So I feel like it's like one of the things he enjoys to do. It's one of my biggest joys, because I've always said that most Sondheim shows for me have taken usually 3 to 4 listens to be like, oh, okay. Like, I start to get it and see how everything is kind of locking in together. And that's the fun for me. It's like trying to figure out how it all works together. So the last little run here that we go through is, what would we do without you? How would we ever get through? Who sends anniversary wishes? Who helps with the dishes and never says boo? Who changes subjects on cue? Who cheers us up when we're blue? Who is a flirt, but never a threat? Reminds us of our birthdays, which we always forget. How would we ever get through? What would we do without you?
What would we do without you? How would we ever get through? Who sends anniversary wishes? Who helps with the dishes and never says boo? Who changes subjects on cue? Who cheers us up when we're blue? Who is a flirt, but never a threat? Reminds us of our birthdays, which we always forget. What would we do without you?
Just what you usually do.
Right!
So definitely, I think the one lyric here that is the standout, or that calls attention to itself a little bit, which is the who is a flirt but never a threat.
Yes.
Right. So like, he's our single friend. We'll allow him to be like a little bit flirty with our spouses, but we know that nothing's ever going to actually happen.
Yeah, and this is for people who like the gay reading of Bobby.
Yes, right.
This is one of the lines that they point to a lot, as this is something that people say about gay men who have very close relationships with women. And I always think it's interesting. So I don't know if you're going to talk about this in other episodes, but Sondheim and Firth and Prince all have categorically denied any sort of gay reading of Bobby. Yeah. But Firth himself, so in early drafts of this show, Firth writes, Bobby's name is George, and he even says that it's about himself. And Mary Rogers, who's very close to Sondheim, who was very close to Sondheim, she's since passed away, also said that how Bobby sees relationships is how Sondheim sees relationships, because Sondheim obviously notoriously did not have a serious relationship until the 90s. And I think this is one of those things where you can't extricate the fact that both Sondheim and Firth were gay men, and that they were people who struggled with commitment like Bobby. So they both had extremely intimate friendships. Hal Prince's wife and Sondheim used to go skiing together and stuff like that. And he was very close to Mary Rogers, very close to Lee Remick. He said that he would have married some of these women if he had been straight. And George Firth was very close to actually Carrie Fisher at this time, which I always find really interesting. And so they have these intimate friendships. So for me, it's hard to say, like, is this Bobby being gay, or is this just Bobby being Sondheim and George Firth? And can you separate those?
And that's so hard, because as much as they reject the claim of the gay reading, which I'm kind of aligned with that. Like, I've never really read Bobby as a gay character. That being said, like, it's almost near impossible not to bring a little bit of yourself into what you're writing here. And so if it's like we're like writing about relationships, well, I'm going to write about how relationships affect me. And the fact that you're gay is going to influence the fact that this is how this show is going to get written in the first place. So yeah, it's like this, I don't know, snake eating its own tail almost of like, how does this all work together?
Yeah, and I do find, like, for me, it doesn't really matter if Bobby is gay or not. Like, I think there are reasons at the time and continually that people do want to read him that way, but that doesn't change the fact that all kinds of people have commitment problems.
Yeah.
But I do find this line interesting because the other thing, and if you wanted to read it in the straight way, it is, because he refuses to be vulnerable with anyone, he's not a threat, right? He, like, even if he slept with one of these women, which I can't see him doing, he would never have a close, intimate relationship with them because he doesn't have a close, intimate relationship with anyone, not even himself. So, no fear.
Yeah. Here's how basically the song ends. We'll run here to the end. What would we do without you? How would we ever get? How would we ever get? How would we ever get? How would we ever get through? What would we do without you? And Robert says, just what you usually do. Right. You sit with us, you who share with us, you who fit with us, you who bear with us, you who. And then Robert says, okay, now everybody, isn't it warm? Isn't it rosy? Side by side. And then one of the couples dances. Ports in a storm, comfy and cozy, side by side. A second couple dances. Everything shines, how sweet, side by side. The last couple dances. Parallel lines who meet side by side, and then Robert tries a little tap dance, and then people just kind of like stare at him blankly. Or if it's in the 2006 version, this is where he plays the kazoo, and then everyone looks at him blankly. And then we finish off by year after year, older and older, side by side, sharing a tear and lending a shoulder, side by side. One's impossible, two is gloomy, give another number to me, side by side, 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 by side. I'm pretty sure I got the right number of sides in there.
What would we do without you?
Just what you usually do.
Right. You who sit with us, you who share with us, you who fix with us, you who bear with us, you who, you who, you who, you who, you who.
Okay, now, everybody.
Isn't it warm? Isn't it rosy? Side by side. Ports in a storm, comfy and cozy, side by side. Everything shines, how sweet, side by side. Parallel lines who meet, side by side. Year after year, older and older, side by side. Sharing a tear and lending a shoulder, side by side. Two's impossible, two is gloomy, give another number to me, side by side, 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 by side.
Okay, so I guess a few different things about this kind of longer section that I just went through. One, the how do we ever get, where that's repeated a few times. That's actually cut out of the 2006 version, so it doesn't actually happen. The part I want to just very briefly mention, just because it's actually somewhat goes against what Sondheim's own writing advice is, but the "you who sit with us, you who share with us," I actually find that is hard to differentiate in some of the recordings, that they're saying "you who." Sometimes it just sounds like they're saying you sit with us, you share with us, you fit with us. Like they're just extending the you bit of it. So it's interesting that he decided to do that. I think it's mostly so that we can go into the you who's at the end of it. It does sound awkward, I find, in mostly the original Broadway cast recording, where it's very hard to differentiate that there's two words being sung there.
Yeah, now when it's sung, oftentimes part of it is they do staccato, so like shorten the two.
Yeah.
So if you who sit with us, you who share, because if you elongate them too much, they easily run into each other and just sound like you. And I agree, it is confusing.
Okay, yeah, we talked about the kazoo that Bobby plays. This is actually very important, because the whole point of that 2006 version is the fact that Bobby does not play any instrument, where everybody else in the cast is playing an instrument throughout the production. And then Bobby plays the piano at the very end when he has his being alive moment. So this is the one exception to that, where he just literally plays one single note on his little kazoo, and then people look at him weird. Which I think it does work.
This whole part right here with the dance break part, that's what I call it, because I don't know, the dance duet breaks, is to me a really interesting moment that I like to sort of think through. What are some other ways this could happen that would make it so Bobby's not alone, right? So if we want to think about like what role could friendship play. So the one that I came up with, this is in a utopic ideal world where the couple is not centered, everyone would dance with him. So he would dance and then everyone would dance, right? So there is this way in that his friends could support him. But what's very clear to me in this whole song is that he supports his friends and his friends do nothing for him. Like these are all like, what would we do without you? I love that line. Just what you usually do. That's like one of my favorites.
Yeah.
But there is this way in which they become dependent upon him, but he refuses to be dependent upon them. But that's what makes him alone too. So I don't know. I like this moment because it does feel very much like this is what is happening in this play. But then this really tangible moment where you can imagine other things filling in metaphorically. Like he could just dance for twice as long and enjoy being alone. Like there are ways in which, if this was a healthier situation, this could work, right? But because it's this unhealthy situation, it doesn't work. I don't know. Maybe I'm reading too much into it. Who knows?
Well, no, I guess like in a different version of this entire show, if the rest of it was like Bobby should just become comfortable being alone. Like that's the song he sings at the end. Being alone, maybe would be in that version. Yeah. But it's like it's sometimes okay to do things by oneself. You don't have to have a crowd around you the entire time. But I think what this is, just kind of reiterating what you just said, I think this is this weird juxtaposition of like this kind of vaudeville song and dance number that's going on with the fact that, hey, he's actually saying, I'm supporting you and you're not supporting me. And that doesn't seem to be really resolved very much by the end of it either, where it's just going to continue being the same type of relationship going forward.
Well, that's one of the things I actually love to look at in productions is what does Bobby do after that moment that no one dances with him? Because in some versions, he's sad in all of them, right? He's sad and alone and like wanders around a little bit. But in some versions, he does eventually join up back with the group. And in other productions, he doesn't join back up with the group at all.
Right.
And I actually like that second version a lot better, because then that's a learning moment for him where he's realizing that as well. Like he's realizing that they're not there for him in a way that he wants someone to be there for him for.
Yeah, which is, again, more important for the end of the show when he comes to that realization.
But it also makes this song, which is so upbeat, such a downer.
Yeah, no, for sure. That's like what Sondheim loves to do. It's like, this sounds happy, but it's actually very sad what you're listening to. Right.
And because there is a way that this number could be just like interpreted as a celebration of friendship. And isn't it great that we can have friends outside of our marriages and blah, blah, blah. But that's clearly not what this is. And this moment really just highlights that. In case you've been confused, this is what this is actually about.
Yeah. Well, I mean, even at the very end here, which is great because we've heard a few different times him using numbers to explain what's going on, but 1's impossible, 2 is gloomy, give another number to me, which is just fun, right? Like 1 is impossible because you're alone, 2 is gloomy because you feel like you're separate from this other 2. It's like, well, give some number so I feel included somehow. I don't know what that number is, but I need it given to me now.
Right, and clearly they don't know what that number is because then they go just stay side by side by side by side by side by side,
Yeah, ad
infinitum. Yeah.
So I guess that's where I want to like round off here then. Like, what is this song trying to communicate to the audience?
Yeah, I think it depends on the production.
Yeah, sure.
But I think in the end it is sort of depicting that for these couples, and I say that because this is not what I believe, but for these couples in this show, Bobby will never fully be included in their relationship.
Right.
Right. He will always be the plus one and the third wheel, as it were. And it's not a tricycle. Right.
Sure.
And so that is where we start to see sort of the breakdown and him actually wanting something that isn't just the shallowness of what he's wanted so far. I mean, one of the things that Sondheim says about this show is people say it doesn't have a plot. And he always points out, well, it doesn't have a plot necessarily, but Bobby's character develops through the show. And I think this is one of those little moments that if you're not paying attention, you're not going to get. But I think this is a moment that Bobby does realize what he wants, because we end act 1, depending on the production, with either him proposing to Amy or with Marry Me a Little, which is one of my favorite songs. And either way, he's like lying to himself that he can continue these sorts of shallow relationships and still, get married, right? And I think here we see him realizing that no, he has to be all in.
No, I agree. I just the more I talk about this show, like, it's interesting. When I first started thinking about this song, I didn't think there was going to be lots to talk about, and we've now been talking for like an hour and 15 minutes.
I know. I'm sorry we've been talking so long.
No, but this is great because it just reinforces my feelings that Company is just like this really layered and textured show, and I think it does depend on the creatives that are coming aboard to put it on, and I think there's just different ways you can explore what this is really trying to say. At its core, it's like all these different ways that we can take a look at relationships, and updating to the modern day and gender flipping it has been so interesting to me, because I think there's just different ways to explore the same material. For me, I would love to see them try and put on one where Bobby is like explicitly like a bisexual character, where you could have like the boyfriends and girlfriends type of thing, like, and that would add another layer onto this show. And so they might not have meant it to, they might not have even set out to try and do something like this, but I think that like Hal Prince, George Furst, Stephen Sondheim have created something that can constantly be reinvented and redone to really comment on the day, because I don't know if we'll ever fully be able to grapple with this, because everyone's going to go through a version of this at some point in their life, and they're going to connect with it. So I don't know, there's just like endlessly amount of different things you can talk about with this show.
Yeah, as a bisexual woman myself, I wanted, spoilers if you haven't seen the newest version, I wanted Joanne to hit on Bobby so badly, and it did not happen, and I was really sad. And I also wanted that homosexual experience scene in there. It wasn't right, and I'm glad they changed it, but part of me secretly wanted that.
No, I get it. Ashley, thank you so much for joining me here today. This has been great. If people wanted to stay in contact with you, what is the easiest way for them to do that?
I'm on Twitter. My Twitter handle is Pribyl, Prabble, Pribble, Prabble. or send me an email at apribyl22@gmail.com. Or if you want to see what I'm up to, I have, I think, a professional website at Arizona State. You can, in a LinkedIn, and you can see sort of my publications. I'm always willing to share them and what I'm doing. And also, shameless plug for the tiny Venn diagram of people who love Sondheim and Formula One. I also have a Formula One blog.
Oh, that's amazing. That's great. Do you have any like ETA on when your book is going to be finished?
Oh God, no. So
Okay.
I just finished my dissertation, and I hopefully will have a contract by the end of next year. So I would
nice.
say 3 years. It's going to be a little while, so don't hold your breath. But I am really excited about it, and I'm doing the research. So
I'm excited to read it, and whenever it comes out, I'll invite you back on so we can maybe have a fuller discussion about the book in general.
that would be great.
So, thank you once again.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening. You can send emails to puttingittogetherpodcast@gmail.com. Also, you can follow Sondheim Podcast on Twitter and Instagram. And you can support the show on Patreon by going to patreon.com/puttingittogetherpodcast. Thanks to the Alberta Podcast Network, to ATB, and the Seat Giant this week. Putting It Together is available on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and pretty much anywhere you can get podcasts from. So consider subscribing so you never miss an episode. Next week, we'll be talking about Poor Baby and TikTok. I thought it was called Musical.ly. As always, a big thanks to the great Chris Taniguchi who designed the podcast artwork, and to Nick Driscoll for composing our theme music. For now, we've reached the end of our episode. Yes, I know. Goodbye for now. I'm just getting over a bit of a sickness, so you might hear it a little bit in my throat, and I'll probably cough a couple times, but we'll make it through.
That's fine. I have massive vocal fry all the time, so good luck.